Hello. Hi, friends. How are you today? Good to see you all. I am happy to be here on YouTube Live. A lot that we can talk about. It's a lovely Sunday afternoon, evening, actually. I say it's evening because it's dark, but it may be just an afternoon. I don't know. Depends how you want to categorize things. But it is pitch black here in New York City. It is winter time, and I'm happy to be with you all here on social media to have a chat about issues that are on people's minds. So, welcome, welcome, welcome. If you haven't done it already, now is the time to tweet this out, to let people know about it. Shout out to Dante. He says, Happy St. Nicholas Day. Well, Happy St. Nicholas Day to you, Dante, if that's a holiday that you observe. But now's the time to tweet this out. Make this a bigger conversation. We don't want to be all by ourselves here. There's a few of us here, but expand it. Let's get this going. Let's make this a broad topic conversation. Tim says hello, and I say hi to you, Tim. My best wishes. A lot that we can talk about, a lot going on in the world, a lot that's on people's minds. The biggest story, I would say at this point, the biggest issue. At this point, we are seeing, the aftermath of the arrest of the chief financial officer of the largest telecommunications manufacturing corporation in the entire world. Huawei, I'm sure I'm butchering it. I don't speak Chinese. It's the tonal language, and it is not the language that I speak, but the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world, Huawei. The CFO was in Canada, just, doing some routine business, grabbed by U.S. officials, right? Being extradited, possibly to the United States on criminal charges. This is big. This would be like, imagine that Bill Gates, right? Wealthy, Microsoft, billionaire capitalist of the United States. Imagine that Bill Gates was on vacation or having a routine business trip in China, and Bill Gates was arrested. That would be huge, and the U.S. government would be outraged. Or imagine that, Steve Jobs, at the time he was living, when he was running Apple, he was just somewhere on a routine business trip, China, Russia, someplace like that, and he was arrested. That is a huge deal. This is big. This is very, very big, and there's the potential here for some very, very serious fallout. Now, we don't know what's going to happen next, but this is big. This is big. MJ says, hi from me and Joe. Well, best to you, MJ. Hi, Caleb says, fresh flowers. Well, hi to you. But let me re-emphasize how big this is. This CFO, right, the daughter of the founder of Huawei, which is technically under Chinese law, it's considered to be a cooperative, but it's basically a government-controlled corporation. The board of advisors are almost all folks that are tied in with the Chinese military. The corporation was established by the Chinese government. Almost, the majority of what they do is in coordination with Chinese government planning. It's not just, a market corporation that just does whatever happens to be profitable for those who own it. It's part of the state-controlled apparatus of production in China. It's technically private. However, it's basically tied in with the state-controlled apparatus of production. It doesn't just do whatever is profitable. It's part of the state central plan in China. It's very tightly controlled by the party, especially by the Chinese military. That's actually how it began, was running the Chinese military telecommunications. That's how the corporation began. Biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world. The CFO, the daughter of the person who started the company, is in China, or is in Canada, on a routine business trip, grabbed. That's huge. That is huge. And what shocks me is that apparently at the same time that Trump and President Xi were meeting in Argentina and had a very good meeting and agreed that there would be no more tariffs after January and everything was going to be fine, at the very same time that was happening, the CFO was being grabbed. That's big. That is very, very big. The fallout of this is very, very big. And we're starting to see a pattern here. The fact that Butina, this woman who happened to be married to a guy who was a leader of the National Rifle Association, Russian woman, the fact that she's been grabbed, right? And now we see this prominent Chinese CFO, business person being grabbed. This is big. This is an escalation. It's one thing to put sanctions on a country. It is something completely different to start grabbing prominent citizens and holding them and arresting them. And you should see some of the reports about how these people are being treated when they're grabbed. They aren't being taken to country house prison. This isn't symbolic. If you read about Butina being wakened up every 15 minutes so she has not slept since she's been detained. Some of these reports that are coming out about how these people are being treated, and these people, again, they've been grabbed. These are prominent people from other countries. They haven't even been convicted of crimes, but they're being held. They're being detained at the behest of U.S. officials. Butina is actually held by U.S. officials, but others are being held. The CFO in Canada is being held at the request of U.S. officials by Canadian officials. These people are being treated horrifically. This is big. This is very, very big. And we should all be very, very worried about this. This kind of escalation is not good. Not good at all, right? The supposed allegation against the CEO of Huawei is that she supposedly did business with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Oh, no. She wanted to trade with Iran, an anti-imperialist country. Oh, no, you can't have that, right? Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is, murdering journalists and killing people in Yemen and slaughtering them. But, oh, no, a Chinese corporation may have sold some cell phones to Iranian people. Right. Who in the right mind would think that Iranians should have the right to talk on a cell phone? That's the mindset that's going on here. It's a very touchy and scary situation. Now, I've been seeing all your comments. Don't worry. Shout out to Kinky. Shout out to Ronnie Miller. Someone wanted me to touch on the yellow vests movement in France, and I will touch on that. That's on the agenda, so have no fear. But we should all be deeply concerned about this. This going after individuals, this is big. This is very, very big. Shout out to Lisa Hauserman. Thanks for being there. A lot that we're going to talk about today. Lovely, lovely afternoon, evening here in Brooklyn. A lot to talk about. So there you go. Now, another thing that's worth pointing out is this INF treaty, right? Folks will know about the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement. This was a treaty that was signed in 1987. It was key in ending the Cold War and basically outlaws the construction of any short-range nuclear devices, right? Short and intermediate range nuclear devices, you can't make them. You can make long-term nuclear devices, you can't make short-range ones, right? Well, the USA is on the verge of pulling out of that. They gave Russia this, 60-day ultimatum. Either they stop, they fully comply with it in 60 days, or the USA is pulling out. But here's the thing. Russia says we are complying with it, right? Russia says, how can you ask us as an ultimatum to stop doing something that we're not doing? Right? Russia maintains they are fully following it. The USA says, well, they're violating it. The USA isn't specifying how they're violating it. It says, well, Russia's violating it. But if you get a little deeper, it seems like there's almost a revelation that the USA wants to expand its nuclear arsenal. And we have statements from John Bolton to that effect. Let's be real, all right? Let's just be real about the facts here. A short or intermediate range nuke from Russia could not reach the United States. A short or intermediate range nuke from the USA could not reach Russia. Couldn't happen, right? Short and intermediate range, you can't hit the other side of the world with that. So the countries that are particularly upset about this are not simply Russia. It's not simply Russia that's upset about what's apparently an escalation of the arms race. But the countries that are particularly upset about it are the EU countries, because a short or intermediate range nuclear device could hit them from Russia, and one from their country could also hit Russia. So it's kind of a concern there. But what else is on people's minds? Now, Ronnie Miller says Europe is caught in the middle, and that seems to be one of the key differences between the Trump administration and the Obama administration. Obama bent over backwards to appease Europe. In fact, Obama even campaigned. While he was on the campaign trail running for president of the United States, he went actually to Berlin. Do folks remember that? He went to Berlin, right? And he campaigned in Berlin, spoke to thousands of Berliners, right? Obama was obsessed with getting along with Europe. Meanwhile, Trump has been kind of going out of his way to offend Europe. He's been trying to strong-arm the Germans into buying American oil and gas, even though Russia's right next to them and it'll cost him way more. Now he's pulling out of the Short and Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, and it looks like Trump is offending Europe. That seems to be, he doesn't want to keep them happy. He has no problem offending Europe. And people look at that, and there are different factions within the American ruling class and among the rich and powerful, but that seems to be one of the key differences between the administrations, is their approach to dealing with, not Britain. Britain seems to be friendly with the Trump administration and follow him, even though there's criticisms of his policies and stuff, but they ultimately follow behind him in foreign policy. But Germany, France in particular, the EU countries, they feel like the White House is not looking out for them, and that the partnership that existed during the Obama administration has been eroded. And I think you can point to a key difference there. Now, you'll note today I'm not drinking that diet beverage that won't be named. I'm actually drinking orange juice, right? Wintertime. They say during the wintertime it's good to have a lot of citrus. I like the taste of orange juice. So today, I will name the beverage. It's orange juice. That's what I'm drinking. So refreshing. So what else is on people's minds, right? A lot of people asking about the yellow vests. I think the yellow vest movement is great. I think it's exciting. You look, they're raising economic demands, right? Why should they have to pay more for the price of gas, right? Why should the people be forced to pay for the price of gas, right? Why should social services be cut? President Macron, supposedly a leftist or a liberal, or, he's not like Mélenchon. He's not a socialist or a communist, but he's, a center-left kind of guy. He's like a Hillary Clinton kind of guy. He's basically carrying out policies of austerity and neoliberalism. He's cutting social programs. He's making the people pay for the shortage and the economic crisis that the bosses created. And it's particularly hard on people in rural areas in France, right? The urban folks are getting taken care of, but rural areas, young people who live in, not Paris, in the rural kind of areas, farming areas, they're being hit pretty hard, right? They don't have as much access. The access to public transportation isn't as good. They drive around. They're getting hit by these fuel prices much more, right? And at this point, a lot of people are in the streets. Now, one thing that struck me, a couple things. First thing, I don't know if folks have seen this, but there's a picture that's floating around on social media that just caused a huge amount of outrage in France, is that a lot of these young people that were protesting were lined up and they had to put their hands behind their heads, right? And they're lined up. There's just a huge amount of outrage all throughout France about how degrading that is. People are comparing it to like an execution by firing squad. It's just, why would they degrade these young people? And I'll tell you, when I saw that picture, my first reaction was, I'm sorry, I've been to a few protests myself. I've seen police pull out their sticks and drag people. Like, what's the deal? But then I thought for a moment, and I said, you know what? That is degrading. Think about that. That's degrading, right? That whole lines of young people, 40, 50 of them, lined up having to do this with the police, standing there with their batons behind them. That's degrading, right? It's degrading, and it's unacceptable. Now, we tolerate in the United States levels of political repression that are far bigger than that, right? We do, right? I mean, I was part of Occupy Wall Street. I saw police doing just awful things during the Occupy Wall Street protests. But, what's to say that's it doesn't make it what the police are doing in France okay. And that's one of the traps people fall into, right? Is that they've seen something in their life, and so they see somebody else suffering, and they want to compare it. And I caught myself doing that for a moment, and I try not to do that. You never want to get into this suffering Olympics. Well, I've suffered more than you have. Oh, what happened to me was way worse than what happened to you. No, it's not a productive conversation. The way the police degraded these young people, made them put their hands behind their heads and lined them all up, it's wrong. Shouldn't happen. They were protesting. They were part of a demonstration, and they shouldn't have been treated that way, right? And there are other things that are done to protesters and dissidents that are wrong too. And, but, it shouldn't have happened. Now, the other thing that I thought was just classic. Saw it coming a mile away. Just a mile away I saw this coming. What is now the reaction of the French establishment to the protests in France? What are they saying about it? Are they saying, wow, this shows we have some real problems that need to be addressed? Wow, this shows that our young people are really upset about economic issues. Is that their response? No. Russia did it. I kid you not, right? Russia did it. That's what they're alleging. That's the response of the leadership of France. Russia did it. Russia did it. Vast Russian conspiracy, Russian plot. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I mean, have we learned nothing from the Cold War years when, Martin Luther King Jr. was accused of being a communist? There's a documentary. You can find it on YouTube, made by the John Birch Society from the 1950s, in which they allege that because the civil rights movement had the slogan, "We shall overcome," and that the slogan that Fidel Castro used in the Cuban Revolution was "Venceremos," which means "we shall overcome," that proved that the civil rights movement of the United States and the Cuban Revolution were both plots from Russia. Seriously, you can look this up. It's a documentary. It is a early 1960s John Birch Society McCarthyite documentary in which they allege that Martin Luther King's "We Shall Overcome," the Cuban Revolution Venceremos, proves this link, this communist link between movements. And the civil rights movement couldn't be that black people want civil rights. Couldn't be that. No. It's all a vast communist conspiracy. That's the mindset that the mainstream media in the USA and around the world is pushing, right? Couldn't be that young people are upset about the cost of living and how they're being forced to pay for a crisis of global capitalism. Oh, no, can't be that. Can't be that. It's gotta be a conspiracy from Russia. Now, Lisa Hauserman is talking about, isn't it interesting how Republicans claim Martin Luther King as their own? Yeah, I mean, you got to wonder on some level. This guy Dinesh D'Souza, I've complained about him before. I probably give him too much attention. But I almost wonder how seriously his supporters really take him. Because if you look at it, there was a time where conservatives, at the time the civil rights movement was happening, the feeling among conservatives was that, oh my goodness, the Civil Rights Act is a violation of, quote, states' rights. It's unconstitutional, right? Especially the fact the Civil Rights Act bans private businesses from discrimination. There was a lot of conservatives who said, look, this is an intrusion on the rights of private businesses, and it's not free market. It's not. And that was the argument that conservatives generally made, was it was a violation of states' rights, right? And lo and behold, the southern wing of the Democratic Party made roughly the same argument, but the northern wing of the Democratic Party, the Kennedy family, and others that were in favor of the civil rights movement, they prevailed. But now, instead of trying to argue against the civil rights movement, instead of trying to argue for states' rights or whatever, now conservatives just say, oh, well, Martin Luther King wasn't a Democrat. The Dixiecrats were all Democrats. That's true. The Dixiecrats, the Jim Crow, segregate, they were all Democrats. So actually, Martin Luther King at one point, and this is also true, was a registered Republican. So therefore, the civil rights movement was conservative, was right-wing, was Republican. Really. No, that's the argument. And anyone who studies the civil rights movement for more than 2 minutes knows that that's not the case, right? We know that, for example, Martin Luther King Jr.'s big 1963 March on Washington, right? Who sponsored it, right? Who was it? Was it the Council of Conservative Citizens? No. It was sponsored by the United Auto Workers Union, which at that point was led by Victor Reuther and Walter Reuther, the Reuther brothers, who were Socialist Party members, right? One of the speakers at the march was Norman Thomas, a socialist. It was endorsed by the Kennedy administration. The Kennedy administration signed the Civil Rights Act. The Johnson administration signed the Voting Rights Act. Maybe I have them confused, but it was the Kennedy-Johnson Democrats, the northern wing of the Democratic Party, even though Johnson was from Texas. It was the northern wing of the Democratic Party that were big supporters of the Civil Rights Movement. Republicans were opposed. Democrats were opposed. And that's a matter of historical record. The arguments that were made against the Civil Rights Movement were the same kind of arguments that conservatives make today. Oh, it's big government. It's communism. If they don't like it down there, why don't they just move to some other state, those were the kind of arguments they were making. It was the opposition to it. They had signs. They said things like race mixing is communism, communist plot. It was the Tea Party, right? The opposition to the Civil Rights Movement. Sure, a lot of them were registered Democrats because it was the South, but it was a right-wing conservative Tea Party movement. They were citing the Bible. The Supreme there was a ruling. The famous Supreme Court ruling in which they outlawed laws against interracial marriage. The judge in the original case had argued that interracial marriage had to be outlawed because God had created separate races and put them in different places, and this was a violation of God's will. He was citing the scripture. Is that a super liberal thing to do? I mean, come on, right? We know that the opposition to the civil rights movement was coming from a right-wing place. And you almost wonder, I feel like Dinesh D'Souza's followers know that to some degree. It's like he's not trying to convince them that things were different and that the Ku Klux Klan were all a bunch of liberals. I don't think that's what he's trying to do. I think it's more like he's trying to make kind of a, it's like when you're conservatives around, when conservatives are around liberals and they get baited on it, they can just say, oh yeah, well, I mean, it's like he's giving them ammunition for arguments almost. But what is weird is that he says so many things that just don't make any sense. In one particular claim that he makes is he tries to make the claim that the Democratic Party was the party of Jim Crow segregation, which it was, because they were Marxists. I mean, that's just completely out there, especially when you look at the fact that the Republican Party was endorsed by Karl Marx, that Abraham Lincoln had a communist general, August Willich, in the Union Army. There was an entire communist division of the Union Army called the Ohio 9th Regiment. Die Neuner. It was German immigrants who had fought in the German Revolution of 1848 and were Marxists. I mean, that's just bonkers. I mean, the notion that the Democratic Party of the slave South was Marxist is ridiculous. Marx was a big supporter of the North during the Civil War. He was a big supporter of the Republican Party. So it's like, you almost wonder, I would love to debate Dinesh D'Souza. I would love to do it. I don't think he'll ever do it because I could destroy it. What I just said refutes, a 2-hour movie he made with a big budget. He probably, I don't know how much his movie cost. He made The Death of a Nation, and he's made lots of, films and all of that, and you can just sit down with him and just demolish him. So, I feel like, they're doing performance art, and it's like Charlie Kirk is very similar. I would debate Charlie Kirk in a heartbeat. If Charlie Kirk said he wanted to debate, I would do it. But then again, I feel like he won't do it. Charlie Kirk, you can't ever get a straight answer out of these people. China is successful because it's capitalist, even though there's a huge amount of state ownership and the government directs and controls the economy. Meanwhile, the USA is failing because it's socialist, even though we have barely anything, any welfare state, let alone government control the means of production. So, and then in the conversation, a couple minutes later, when they're talking about China, they'll be like, oh, China, they're violating human rights. Why? Because they're communists. Well, I just thought you just said they're capitalist. There's no clear line about, and then, they say the USA is failing because it's socialist. But then they'll say, oh, but the USA is the richest country in the world because it's capitalist. There's no clear rules. They have this like pre-prescribed government intervention in the economy is always bad, and it's communism. And anything bad in the world is because of communism. Anything good in the world is because of capitalism, and they don't know what they're talking about. And it's just, and they don't really respect the people who listen to them. I would debate one of these people. I would do it. I would have a public debate with these people. I don't think they would do it because they're not talking to me, right? And the other thing is that I'm not really on their radar screen. The kind of people they like to debate are your typical like campus leftists, right? Who think that you're who have a list of isms that you're not supposed to be. You're not supposed to be racist, sexist, transphobic, or homophobic, or whatever. That's who they want to debate, right? Is kind of these angsty campus liberals that have a list of rules that everyone must follow. And they tap into kind of the resentment that a lot of people feel about the, what you might call like the atmosphere on the campuses. And they go around, and that's what they do, really. That's what they're about. And I don't really fit into that because I'm making economic arguments for socialism, and I'm not, I'm there, and on some degree they're trolling liberals. They're saying things that are just designed to kind of incite difficulties. And then on top of that, it's just not my cup of tea. I would do it, but I feel like they wouldn't debate me. But I'm open to it. Hey, if Charlie Kirk is watching, I'll debate you. Dinesh D'Souza, if you're watching right now, I will debate you. I would like to debate somebody. I'd be very interested in debating one of these guys, one of these historical revisionists who think that I don't know, that the Dixiecrats of the Jim Crow era were communists. I'd love to debate one of them. I don't think it'll happen, but we'll see. I would love to debate them. I did debate Augustus Sol Invictus, and I feel like that debate went amazingly well. Caleb and I should debate Dinesh and Charlie Kirk, says Progun Red. Yes, that would be great. I'm going to drink some more orange juice. But there's a lot more things that we can talk about. I wanted to mention, the The way that these guys argue, it makes me think about the Twilight Zone. You ever watch the Twilight Zone? Folks ever watch it? 1950s television program. And it's a liberal program. It's not a right-wing conservative program. It's liberal, right? Rod Serling is kind of a Cold War liberal. The idea is if we have to stay true to our liberal American ideals, and that if we, if we oppose, if we become authoritarian and McCarthyist, that'll help the communists win, and that the way to fight the communists is to be liberal. That's kind of the message of the show, and it's Cold War liberalism. And interestingly, there's one particular episode of it that's just classic, and it really kind of shows you, I would say, not like a liberal in the sense of Democratic Party mindset, but a liberal ideology mindset of the individualism above all else, the mindset that really kind of overtook the United States in the aftermath of the Second World War. This is the episode. It's called "To Serve Man." And basically, in this episode, you have a group of aliens are coming to Earth, and they're being really super nice to everybody. And they give people medicine that cures all diseases, and they're expanding the human life expectancy, and they're wiping out world hunger, and they're just doing all these super nice things for planet Earth. These aliens that have come to Earth, they're really, really nice. And then they decide, they're going to take some of the humans to their home planet, right? And the whole time these aliens are doing this, they have a book that they keep referencing. And the book is called To Serve Man, right? And they say, well, this is why we're doing all these nice things. We have this book called To Serve Man. And they're going around feeding people and all that. So then they're going to take some people to their home planet to show them what things are really like. So, lo and behold, the people are getting on the spaceship, and they're going to go to the planet where these nice aliens who've been doing all these nice things for them and wiping out world hunger and doing all the nice things. And so they're about to get on the spaceship, and someone who's been translating this book, To Serve Man, runs toward the spaceship and is shouting, "It's a cookbook! It's a cookbook!" Right? So the idea is the aliens are taking these people back to the planet to eat them. So what's the message there? Well, the message is, if anyone comes and offers to make a better life, if a politician or a world leader comes and tries to take care of you and tries to improve things, they're just a predatory tyrant. You have to remember, what was this probably inspired by? Right? This is the 1950s, the United States. What had just happened? What earth-shaking event had just happened? The Chinese Revolution of 1949. And what was the slogan, and still today is the official slogan of the Chinese Communist Party? Serve the people. Serve the people. Right? And that this was a subtle attack on the Chinese Communist Party, right? Look, they said that they wanted to help the Chinese people, which they actually did, and actually now China's a global superpower. 700 million people lifted out of poverty. But it's a cookbook! And they've kind of trained Americans to think that way. They really have. It's like, I remember in the 90s, my parents really believed, they would tell me with a straight face, I didn't know any better, I was a kid, that if we had national health care like we have in Britain, people would die. My parents told me that in Britain, people die all the time waiting to get surgery. That's just not true. They believed it, and they saw it on 2020, and they heard that in Canada, people die all the time. Oh my goodness, you can't, someone says they want to give everyone health care, but it's a cookbook, right? Oh, or, raise the minimum wage, right? Why should people have a full-time job and not be able to support themselves? Maybe we should have a decent minimum wage. That sounds like a logical, normal argument. It's a cookbook, right? That's basically how they've gotten Americans to think about economics, right? If any leader comes along and starts trying to improve things for the people of the country, it's a cookbook. Run as fast as you can. That's how they've brainwashed Americans. It's a cookbook. Around the same time, well, it's actually late 40s, they made a movie about Huey Long, the politician that people in Louisiana loved. The man who built so many bridges, who wiped out illiteracy in the state of Louisiana, wiped out adult illiteracy in one of the poorest states in the country. Built night schools. He did so much to help the people of Louisiana. But the way his entire leadership of the state of Louisiana was rewritten was that he was this corrupt, mean dictator, tyrant. It's this mindset that you should be terrified, you should be afraid of anyone who's trying to do anything good, right? Any politician who steps in and tries to improve things for the people is just a cynical tyrant, and that the ideal state is for the government to just keep its hands off and let everyone take care of themselves, you know, every individual for themselves. The 1950s, so everyone has their little house, and they've got their perfectly mowed lawn that shows people how organized and anal retentive they are because their lawn is just perfectly mowed, and they've got their little car, and they've got their house, and they're far away from everyone else, and they're working really hard and trying to make a lot of money, and everyone keeps their hands off everybody else, and the government doesn't try to mobilize the population, and there's no group identity or mindset. Everyone's just kind of distant and far away, and there's no collectivism, and every individual is just kind of left to do their own thing, and that's the ideal place, right? And that's the mindset of liberalism, the ideology of liberalism, right? And the reality is that human beings are collective creatures. You know, they do work together. They get things done, they cooperate, and that human beings are indeed collective creatures. They work together, and that no, you know, when for example, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, you know what, millions of Americans are unemployed, and I think we ought to hire them, and he built highways and post offices all over the country and hired the unemployed in big numbers, it wasn't a cookbook. It wasn't a cookbook, you know? I mean, look, when the Chinese Communist Party took power and raised 700 million people out of poverty, it wasn't a cookbook. You know, if you look at Sputnik and the huge achievements in terms of human development that were carried out, you know, in the Soviet Union, the fact they built the world's largest hydroelectric power plants and went from being one of the most impoverished countries to being a global superpower, and I mean, defeated the Nazis and huge amounts of steel production, electrified the country, wiped out illiteracy. It wasn't a cookbook, right? That politicians, you know, that tend to draw their strength from the people, not from big corporations that are paying them off to be actors, but from the people. It's not a cookbook. It's not a scam. And that's the way they've trained people to think about it. And that it's always a scam, it's always a maneuver. No, it's not. We're being scammed by the big corporations right now. They're scamming people like you wouldn't believe. I mean, demagogy happens, sure. And there is a history of, you know, kind of, you know, authoritarian regimes like Park Chung-hee in South Korea, you know, that take care of a section of the population. Nazi Germany is another example. They take care and they improve the living standards for a section of the population while mobilizing it to beat down other sections. Now that happens. That's a kind of a form of Bonapartism. But overall, you know, this idea that any political leader that comes along and tries to improve people's lives is actually going to eat people for dinner is absurd. It's just ridiculous. And that mindset, you know, it really has had a poisonous effect on U.S. society, and literally poisonous. The children have drunk lead in their water. Why? Well, we can't spend money on infrastructure. Well, that's socialism, right? We can't have the government, like, you know, we need to just let our facilities rot, let our roads rot, right? You know, the government can't be like pouring huge amounts of money into trying to build a better society. Government spending, we got to cut government spending, right? You know, get the government out of our lives. Stop, you know, I mean, that mindset has led to the overall decay of the United States of America. It really has. But a couple other things I wanted to talk about. I wanted to mention, I'll be on here for a little while longer. One of the other things I wanted to mention was that, you know, December 4th, 1978, about 40 years ago, that was a pretty definitive moment in the history of the Democratic Party. December 4th, 1978, that was the day that Dianne Feinstein became the mayor of San Francisco. Now, people might think, okay, so Dianne Feinstein was working her way up the ranks. She was on the board of city supervisors, which is like the city council out in San Francisco. She worked her way up. Oh, no. Look at the details of how Dianne Feinstein moved up the ranks of the Democratic Party. Look at the details of what was taking place at that time. I gotta go, folks. Have a good one.